this culture to clergy in other countries, that this is today part of my studying. When I was sitting, I was just interested to know how many times the word al-aql, the mind, the intellect, was mentioned in the Quran. So I just Googled right away, and it was 49 times mentioned in the Quran. We are living a new era. That you have this information at your fingertips. Now, the challenge for the imams in America who studied in different seminaries in Pakistan or in the Middle East or in Africa, how to realize the change here in the society, that people are ahead of you in terms of adopting certain things. I'm just giving you as an example, of course, GPS. But I'm talking about certain things change here in America way ahead of Europe. I mean, I just came last week from Italy, doing a program with imams over there. The culture in Italy is completely different than the culture in the United States. So imams in Italy are also, their work and their agenda is totally different than imams in America, because you are living in a country where it's okay to be Arab American, it's okay to be Pakistani American, it's okay to be Hispanic, it's okay. The point is, acceptance for cultural diversity is different in America versus other countries. That is making today a challenge for imams and for clergy in America, how to take this message of interfaith overseas. But in order to take this message and accepting these theological differences that might exist and how to deal with these differences, the Quran is training me how to work with my fellow people of the book, the Christians and the Jews. But due to some historic events happened in the last century, I'm talking about the 20th century, and the 19th century, today there has been so much going on in those countries. So until now, these seminaries in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia and in Africa, their curriculum is not introducing, for those who might be imams in Europe or imams in America, certain topics, which is the culture of the people in Europe, the culture of the people in the United States. Things change and things are different between Europe and America. I'm just giving you an example. Because today, when I go to these mosques and I see the change, and you will see the younger generation able to go a little bit faster, but certain imams are still holding back because it's hard for them to, integrate that change. That is bringing a challenge by itself. So that's why I'm talking about the curriculums today. This is not, I'm seeing it, by the way, only in the Muslim seminaries. I'm seeing it also in the Christian seminaries and the Jewish seminaries, to include constantly certain subjects that is important for our society today, because we are moving into pluralism. But you have to help the clergy, the imams and the clergy, of course, to look at this pluralism as the will of Almighty God. So that's why the Quran, again, I'm going back to the Quran, is telling me that it is not the issue of the sons of Israel or the Arabs. Because we have some Arabs today, stuck here in their mind that I'm better because I'm Arab. This is like some of the, I think, within Judaism, you have some people that we are the best because of such and such and such. We have the same problems. We are Arabs and we receive the Quran. So that is making some of the Arabs looking down at some Africans because they don't pronounce the Quran properly. But again, God is telling me it's not the Arab, it's not the sons of Israel, it's not the Americans, it's not the British. the best should be based on taqwa, righteousness and piety, who have more compassion toward others, who have more benefits to give humanity. That's where I have to align myself. How much I give the people and how much I'm really following the teachings of Almighty. So this is the second topic. And the last thing I just would like to mention about the spiritual dimension of cultural pluralism. And that is very important today, because all of our heritage and all of our religions and all of our legacies talk about spirituality. But today, I'm seeing here in America some people who will tell me I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And I can connect with so many people when it comes to spirituality. And they might differ with me on theological issues of my faith. But this is something very important today and is growing more and more. How to also use spirituality and connect through spirituality with people who are different than me in so many ways, in order to have a better society, because the Quran always focusing at the end how to make your society better. Not only your local society, also your neighboring societies, because the Quran talks about neighbor. And the neighbors today is no longer only your neighbor who lives next door, could be also the neighboring country or the neighboring continent. Thank you very much.
So I want to do a couple of announcements before the Q&A. First of all, the next JIDS dialogue will be the first Sunday in November. I think it's the 3rd. And we will be talking about the relationship between dialogue and activism. How does dialogue lead to activism? Why does dialogue matter? And we will also get into this whole notion of what it is that JIDS can take positions on, which will, of course, lead us to talk about the mission of JIDS. So we're not going to have presentations that last this long next session, because we're going to be doing a lot of, back and forth about these other topics. 2 weeks later, the 17th of November, Twinning Weekend, where Jews and Muslims from around the world come together in partnership. We will be doing our 4th annual JIDS Twinning Weekend activity. This event, just like the one on November 3rd, will be at the Muslim Community Center. And officially it starts at 2:30 like the other JIDS events, but youth, teenagers, young adults, if they want to come, can come at 1:15 or 1:45 and eat with the folks who are going to be coming in to MCC who are seniors. So this will be a way to bring together youth and seniors. Please tell the youth in your community about this event when I send around more information in the next week or so that they can engage in small group dialogues with seniors and really have a rich experience. So that's on the 17th of November. But I want to introduce Bob. You're going to be a speaker at the next session. I want to introduce Bob to talk for a couple of minutes about a non-JIDS event, because we have sort of partnered with another group called Heartbeat. We've talked about it before, and I'll let you talk about it for a couple of minutes. But they have a concert. Unfortunately, I'm going to be out of town that weekend. But they have a concert that really the JIDS community needs to support this organization. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity to actually hear the folks from Heartbeat make music. We've been talking about it, but you'll finally be able to hear them. So go ahead. I'll give you a couple of minutes to talk about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take this on that. Since you're going to be out of town on Dan, we actually decided to live stream the content so you'll be able to watch it.
Thank you.
Anywhere you are. My name is Bashar. I've been extremely blessed and fortunate to meet several of you guys here, so thank you for having me, as well as others in the community. While I served in Peace Corps, I was fortunate to work with Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary with an anti-bullying curriculum that was brought to the schools of Ukraine, and ever since I've worked with them on different activities and partnerships. And more recently, as Dan mentioned, I also met Aaron Stayer of the group Heartbeat. So after meeting both of them, Aaron about a year ago, and knowing Peter, we decided here in November to have a concert. We brought together Peter Yarrow, so the older generation with the younger generation directly from Israel and Palestine. So Peter Yarrow, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Heartbeat's going to perform along with Farah Siraj, who's Jordanian, Humayun Khan, who is from Afghanistan, and Annie Shalal from Muslim Poets will host the event at Georgetown University. And we're co-hosted and sponsored at Georgetown by Imam Hendy, Rabbi Gardner, and the Conflict Resolution Program. So we're in great company, great friendships. The show will be about 2.5 hours, and then following we'll have food and continued dialogue with other partners to learn more how we can not only have concerts, but then engage with the communities in Israel and Palestine immediately following. So we have tickets on sale today. Tickets are $20. With any ticket, Aaron has sent me Heartbeat CDs to give out along with the tickets. So let me know afterwards, and then we have more flyers if you guys want to learn more.
And when is it?
Sunday, November 10th. Yeah, so 3 weeks. So it's actually in between the next dialogue, JID meeting, and then 20 weekend the following. So keep you guys. Yes.
And just a quick announcement for people like Dan and myself who are going to be out of town and will be doing something so we can't watch the live streaming. I think they're also going to be performing at American University on Wednesday, November 6th.
So yeah, you can also find out more.
6th.
6th at
American University.
Yeah.
What time?
3 to 5 in the afternoon.
You can learn more at heartbeat.fm.
Heartbeat.com?
FM, so like FM radio. Yeah, not FM. So
Heartbeat.fm.
I'll give you a flyer on the way out. You can look up the information. So they're actually doing 2 weeks of tours, and the idea is to engage the youth voices and the music with as many different audiences as possible. So they're performing at Wilson High School, State Department, this larger concert at Georgetown, American University, and elsewhere throughout the community. So we're happy to co-sponsor these events with Heartbeat. Thank you.
Where's the moderator?
Yeah.
That's a last 2 minutes.
Took less? Okay. I have one final announcement before we do the Q&A, and that is that tomorrow night there will be a free lecture and discussion at the Goethe Institute, which is downtown, a block from the Gallery Place Metro, given by the man who plays the accordion at this shul and is also a local professor, and it will be about the Kabbalah, and this will be at the Spinoza Society. So if you're interested in philosophical implications of the Kabbalah, please come. People are told never to show up at the Spinoza Society if they're not going to talk about philosophy. It's the one rule at the Spinoza Society. They don't always talk about Spinoza, but got to talk about philosophy. So if you're interested in that, it's tomorrow night at 6:30 at the Washington Goethe Institute, which you can Google if you want to know where that is. All right. Please ask your questions, and don't worry if they're provocative. Please ask them. Who has questions or comments?
Well, I will share a very funny experience I had when I was in Thailand on the border of Malaysia. And there was a Islamic university there. And a beautiful young lady comes up in jeans and a motorcycle. And some of the people I was with laughed. And she said, "I know you're wondering about me, but we're not like Arabs. We treat women differently." So I thought that was very interesting.
But even within the category of Arabs, because Arabs, again, there are 350 million, more than 350 million Arabs across 24 different countries. And, because in the interest of time, I'm not going into this, but even within the Arab world, there are also different degrees of, women's participation in the public sphere, including women's employment, dress codes, mingling with men. That is not uniform even across the Arab world. So if you look, for example, at a country like Lebanon or Egypt or Kuwait, They had women's participation in politics and the public sphere much more so than some of the more traditional, Gulf countries. But even in some of the traditional conservative countries, we have seen amazing, iconic images of Arab Muslim women going out and demonstrating in the streets side by side with men and really putting their own lives at risk and being very, very brave and courageous in the public sphere to the extent of risking their own lives or risking being imprisoned or going to jail and harassment. And I consider this to be a very strong form of quote-unquote feminism. I would argue that the women in Yemen, despite their traditional dress, are very, very iconic images of feminists because they have really been storming and flooding the streets for months and months on end, asking for their rights and asking for public participation and political rights in a very, very courageous way. And I'll tell you something interesting here. Ali Abdullah Saleh, the president of Yemen, tried to use the traditional gender stereotype in his speech and to tell them, what are you doing out there in the street? You have no business being out there. Women should stay at home. It is shame on you to be out in the street protesting side by side with men. What did the women do in Sana'a, in Yemen, one of the most traditional conservative Arab countries? The next day, they organized an all-women, demonstration, and they filled the whole streets of Sana'a and other places in Yemen, and it was just phenomenal. And they had signs that said, it is not shame on us to ask for our rights. It is shame on you to be a dictator and to deprive us of our rights. So I would argue that this is a form of feminism that is very, very strong.
But on the other hand, what each one of us were paired with somebody at the Islamic University, and the professor and tea dinner, and the tour, we tourists, he would eat with us, but his wife wouldn't. So we haven't brought the men in yet. His wife stayed in the kitchen.
I actually want to stay on this topic and try to keep provocative questions going. We had a lecture at JIDS, 3.5 years ago, something like that, on women in Islam, given by a very active Shia woman in the interfaith movement, very prominent. And she was saying various things about the rights of women to go out in the workforce and whatnot. But she said some interesting things which I believe she suggested was grounded in Islam, as opposed to saying, well, in my culture, we do this. Such as, for example, in the Muslim house, the man is the CEO. Now, as a Jewish man, right, Mother, if my father had said that to you, I can only imagine what would have happened.
What would have happened?
I don't know. He would never have the chutzpah to say that to her. That's reserved for Jewish women to have that much chutzpah. No, I'm joking. But that notion of, and of course she would have cited statements in the Quran, not unlike certain things that could be cited in the Torah, giving certain rights to women that are not given to men to the same degree. But the idea was that in the Muslim world, people are still paying a lot of attention to those Quranic verses, whereas they may not pay so much attention to the verses in the Torah or the Tanakh that say things similarly. So how would you deal with that notion of the idea that male superiority or dominance or whatever word you want to use from a feminist standpoint is somehow still baked into the religion and not merely into the culture?
Yeah, I will say something and then you can I think that very much goes back to the idea of women being ignorant about the existence, the very existence of these rights in the first place. Now I'll tell you the story of my friend who, has been abandoned by her husband for some time, and she literally was in a limbo situation. Oh, you can
here, I'm going to get out and up in this chair.
You can pick it up and pass it on. Take it out.
Can we need a mic over? Okay.
All right, thank you. This, friend of mine, this is better. She has been abandoned by her husband, so she was in this limbo situation of being married but not really being married. And she goes to the Imam in the mosque and asks him, I'm in this situation where it's a dilemma really. And he tells her, you don't need to suffer from a dilemma because in this kind of condition, there are certain conditions in Islam where the woman can simply annul the marriage contract. And you don't need to come to me as an imam, or you don't need to go to a judge, you don't need to go to court, you don't need to go to a sheikh. It is called fasq, which means breaking or annulling the marriage contract. And the woman was like, what? Because she really did not ever hear about this. And many, many, many women in the Muslim world, in the Arab world, do not hear about these things. Well, for a good reason, right? Because nobody told them. But here's the point. Just like when I was talking about ijtihad, the principle of free interpretation and free thinking, you have to try to really understand your own religion, your own faith, and what your rights are, and then ask for these rights. If you don't know the existence of these rights in the first place, how are you going to ever call for them, right? The right for a woman, for example, to put certain conditions in the marriage contract, such as the right to divorce herself, or the right that her husband does not take a second wife. All of these are rights. Now, many women would be either ignorant of these rights, they don't know about them in the first place, or if they even know about them, they might be constrained by the cultural or traditional or social structure from asking for these rights, which then contributes to the far from ideal situation that many women suffer from in many parts of the Arab and Muslim world. It is not Islam's fault, that's what I'm trying to say. The fault comes from ignorance, comes from lack of awareness, comes from lack of courage or chutzpah, right? Chutzpah means courage, right? To ask for these rights, right? You should go out and call for them. And I always tell my students, I always tell women, don't expect men to come and give you your rights on a silver plate. It will never happen. You should go and ask for your rights yourself, just like any political or social movement. Because women have this attitude of let's wait and see. Is the next government going to be considerate of women's rights? Are they going to be nice gentlemen? Are they going to be understanding? Are they going to be granting us our rights? No, ma'am. It does not work this way. You go out and ask for your rights yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. That's why, I was saying that even during the time of Prophet Muhammad, that there has been different interpretation of his own words when he will tell his disciples to do something. So today, the verse you are quoting from the Quran, it's saying because of their financial contribution that the men are. So again, the culture back then that the man will take care of everything. But the culture today, you have, especially here in the United States, you have women who are working and they might really have a better income than the man. And sometimes the man will sit in the house and take care of the kids because the woman, for whatever reasons, her income is better. And her contribution is completely different now. So with these issues, really, that's why I'm saying that imams in America, the community in Europe and in the United States, I see they are the ones who are going to bring different kind of change also to communities and the younger generation in the Arab world and in Southeast Asia. Because I see the communities here encourages you to lead. In other countries, that's why you see a lot of people like to migrate. I mean, because if they want to, come up with certain things, they might face harassment of, different authorities. And I see for the next 10 years, there will be something coming from here back to the Arab world and the Muslim world in general, because this is the healthy environment for you to come up with your own thoughts. You might be right, you might be wrong, but down the road, now we are seeing the younger generation, who is the generation of the social media and the Facebook and Twitter, find it, yes, this is, more common sense. I'm talking about the issue of women, and no matter what we say, by the way, you will have women here in America who are used to certain things, and women in other parts of the Muslim world, they think I'm crazy. That's fine, but I have to keep in mind these cultural changes and differences in Yemen, as she's saying. No matter what will happen, still some people think this way, which my parents used to do, is the right way. And we are always going to have that, by the way, in our traditions. That's why you have different traditions in Judaism. And somebody, I will end with this, somebody told me, last year, he visited MCC, and when he was, was looking about the community and what we are trying to do, and how I myself am facing some, criticism from the community members here in Silver Spring. He told me, you know what, you are now where we were 100 years ago as Jewish community in America.
Can I add a few words to this?
Yep.
I think each of the panelists wants part of this.
Excuse me?
Yeah, and then Gideon.
So, with respect to, I wanted to speak to what Dan said when he was growing up here in a Jewish household. The man would never consider himself the chief boss of the family and response to that. Dan did not grow up in Europe in an Orthodox household.
That's for sure.
So a lot more is cultural than is religious. In an Orthodox, first of all, in Orthodox Judaism to this very day, a woman cannot demand a divorce. Her husband must grant it to her. Otherwise, she doesn't have a divorce and cannot get remarried.
Oh, yeah, again.
And that's led to several scandals, some in the United States, the last few weeks. So these two, in that particular case, with respect to a comparison between Orthodox Judaism and standard mainstream Orthodox Islam, Sunni Islam, Islam is much more progressive. Women do have the right to ask for a divorce. Now, with respect to the general position of women and to what extent it is religious as opposed to cultural, and Dan was pointing out that, well, maybe it's really religious because this particular spokesperson for Islam spoke about it in religious terms, that is, in Quranic terms, quoted the Quran, quoted verses of the Quran to support the religious origin of this, of the role difference between men and women in Islam. In Orthodox Judaism, to this day, women are not called to the Torah.
They can't tell
They
you.
do not read Torah on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, in Jewish services. In the middle of the service, a portion of Torah is read. By the way, the portion this week is the portion of the sacrifice of Abraham's son. Which disagreement which son it was, but that's the portion we read this week. Now, in the reading of the Torah, a woman cannot come up to read Torah, and to this day, in Orthodox synagogues, she does not. Okay? Nor does she lead a service. She cannot be the cantor to lead a service. Okay? Now, this is considered, or the Imam, that's right, she cannot be the rabbi in the Orthodox thing. Now, this is breaking right now here in one Orthodox synagogue here, but we'll talk about that later. But the issue of why that cannot happen comes from the Talmud. Now, if we go back to the Talmud and we look at what the discussion was among the rabbinic authorities at the time of the Talmud, this we're talking here about 500 more or less, okay? There's a discussion about whether or not women should be called to the Torah. And that discussion revolves around several issues, okay? And the bottom line is the tradition ended up that they're not. But the Talmud, in the discussion, one opinion was that there are certain situations in which a woman must be called to the Torah. And that particular opinion is correct. That particular opinion happened to be a hypothetical situation in which a congregation consisted all of priests, all of Kohanim. Jews divide themselves into three ancestry lines, and the Kohen, ancestry that goes back to supposedly to Aaron, Moses' brother Aaron. Those were the priests in biblical times. Okay? Those were the priests of the temple, the Kohanim. And today, the tradition is to call them, it's just a tradition, that's not a law. The tradition is that Kohanim are called first. They give them the honor of being called the first. For example, on Saturday, 7 people are called. The first one is a Kohen in an Orthodox synagogue. In the Talmud, the discussion revolves around the fact that if you happen to have a congregation in which everyone is a Kohen, then after the first person is called, you must call a woman to the Torah. So much for women can't be called to the Torah. Okay? And this opinion has to do with the fact that the reason women are not called to the Torah is because of the honor of the congregation. If a stranger should come into a congregation and see a woman called to the Torah, he would assume that the men weren't qualified. that something was wrong with all the men in the congregation, otherwise all the men would have been called. Something is wrong with the congregation. So to preserve the honor of the congregation from a negative opinion that a stranger might do, never call a woman. Don't call a woman because someone's going to think something's wrong with all the men. But in the case of a congregation that's all filled with Kohanim, it's a much more difficult situation because if you call a Kohen, not in the first, if someone walks in and notices the Kohen was called 4th or 5th or 6th, he might think something was wrong with that Kohen, he should have been called only 1st. Therefore, in that case, you call a woman. Okay, in terms of this, it's very, very clear that the religious law was purely based on culture, purely based upon the fact that someone who walked in there, given the culture of the society, he would make assumptions about the men in the congregation, or he would make assumptions about going in, because who the heck would call a woman before a man? All right? So the point is, it's very hard to separate culture from religion. To an Orthodox person today, that's religion. Go to the Talmud and you see the reason for the religion, and it was culture.
I would like to add to that this is one opinion, of course.
Yeah, it's not the majority.
One other opinion, and I think this is really quite interesting, and I think that this applies also to Islam. While it's never said it like this, one of the reasons that women cannot come to the Torah, or why a woman has to cover herself and so forth, is not to cause the men to start to think thoughts that are not suitable at the time of prayers. That means, without saying that, there is a recognition about the weakness of men, and then the religion is putting the responsibility, because we are so weak, then you have to protect us by refraining from us hearing your voice, or seeing your hair, or seeing your heels, or whatever. Yes. So I always find it very interesting that they never actually acknowledge it, but they acknowledge it through the discussion. But I think to add to what I said, I think it's important to realize that all religions have the same problem. The Southern Baptists, every year in the conference, reaffirm the idea that the man is the master of the family, because that's what it says in the book of Genesis. Yes? Therefore, it says in the Genesis, you shall desire him, and God says to the woman, and he will rule over you. And they translate it literally, and a woman in the Southern Baptist Church cannot get married unless she acknowledges that fact. Okay? We talked about Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, so I'm not going to repeat all that. I think that eventually the solution will be when you will have the situation that you have already in liberal churches and in liberal Judaism, where women can function, get the function, to serve in every function that men can serve. When Orthodox Judaism eventually will allow women to become rabbis, and when Christian Catholicism will allow women to be priests and so forth, and when there will be women imams, yes, when we will come to that point, that will be the real point where things will change. But things takes their time, even in a non-religious society. I don't remember exactly at what year women got the rights to vote here in the United States, but that's not. When was it? 1921. 1921. That's not so far away. Yes, until then, women were still considered, even here in this society, a second-class citizen.
I just want to comment on one small thing.
Okay. I've got a question. I got you back there.
Quickly, and just
Very quick.
something that Gideon said about the modesty and all of that. A lot of people, when they criticize, women for covering themselves or the veil, they cite this reason. They think that it's only done because men are weak, and therefore the woman has the responsibility to cover herself. Yeah, but in fact, modesty is seen as a shared responsibility in Islam, that both parties have a responsibility to be modest and to be honorable and to be decent. The woman has the responsibility of dressing modestly and acting modesty as well. It's not just about dress, it's also about code of ethics and behavior and social demeanor. But the man also has a responsibility to guard his vision and not to look at women in a lusty way or in a bad way, and should act in a responsible way as well. So it's really a shared responsibility that does not fall on the shoulders of women alone.
Got a question back there. Actually, there is a profound, there's a profound similarity between Jewish men as they get older and Muslim women. You all cover your hair.
Yeah.
We cover our bald spots.
Thank you. When you were saying that the men have the ones who are supposed to be looking, and women are the ones who have to take the punishment for it. Well, I would say it wasn't just in Islam. The modesty aspect was exactly that, being modestly dressed. But the way it's happening today, when you're sort of shrouded head to foot in black, and you're told because men are going to be looking at you, well then I say, well that's the crime someone commits and the punishment somebody else has to take for. But I'm referring specifically to the Saudis and Gulf people, and that actually, just to set the historical record straight, Pakistan, yes, the literacy is really bad, but it's not 10%, it's about 45%, 40-45%. And it's not a tribal society at all. The only tribal areas are the ones we're constantly reading about in the newspapers and the news these days. The areas bordering Afghanistan. The trouble with Pakistan and why they're all in elections, why they're electing the wrong people, is because it's a wretched feudal society. And so you always have to follow the economics. This has got nothing to do with Islam. And that feudalism, the particular feudalism of Pakistan, was not pre-colonial feudalism. This was a feudal order specifically created by the British to hold down the population. And frankly, not just the economics, but the economically, I think they've done a brilliant study where they found that, after colonialism, there was a 300% difference in incomes between the metropolis and the colonized areas. But in every form and shape, literacy was finished. The institutions which supported a progressive Islam, or a institutional Islam where there was actually studies going on, those were totally starved of funds by colonialism. So therefore what was left of institutional Islam was literally, semi-ignorant people teaching semi-ignorant people. So where was the religion going to go? In 150 years, you can pretty well, wipe out any institutional memory that there exists. Despite all that, and despite the communal troubles that were created, a country like Pakistan, and that's why I'd like to really distinguish between areas and regions of the world, and I would refer to South Asian Muslims from Bangladesh to Pakistan, is a completely heterodox variation of the religion. We're totally different from whatever goes on in Saudi. And the Gulf region